Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to discuss a hearing that was held last week by the House Education and Workforce Committee, where Acting Secretary of Labor Julie Su testified as a witness. Now, as background, Ms. Su, of course, has been nominated by President Biden to be Secretary of Labor. She's been in that role in only an acting capacity now for several months, and the nomination has been stalled for those months. In fact, the Biden administration, as being reported by Bloomberg, has now set up a nightly war room to try to advance Sue's nomination. But there is a reason that the nomination has remained stalled, and that is because she is exactly the wrong person for the job. And the testimony that she gave at last week's hearing before the Education and Workforce Committee was evasive, non-responsive, and in some cases outright dishonest, in a way that provided further confirmation that she should not be the next Secretary of Labor of the United States. For starters, the hearing almost didn't happen because Acting Secretary Su tried to cancel at the last moment. Chair Virginia Foxx began the hearing as follows. She said to Ms. Su, "You've been a hard witness to schedule. The committee began working with the department to secure your in-person testimony beginning in March. When you would not appear in May, we honored your request to appear in June using a day, June 7th, that was offered by your staff and to which you agreed. So, Chair Foxx continued, why is it that on a late Friday evening, following the committee's public posting of the hearing a week ago, your staff told us that you were, quote, no longer able to make June 7th work? The only reason Acting Secretary Su did appear before the committee is that the committee was going to resort to a subpoena to get her there otherwise. That was the first major issue with Ms. Su's performance at this hearing, but there were several others. First was her response on the topic of Proposition 22, which was a major labor initiative passed by California voters less than 3 years ago in 2020. Now, Ms. Su was California's Secretary of Labor at the time. She would have been substantially affected by whether this initiative passed or failed. It ended up passing. California voters overwhelmingly chose to allow companies like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash to continue to use independent contractors and thereby allowing them to stay in California. And when I asked Ms. Su how she herself voted as a California voter on Prop 22, she answered as follows. She said, "How did I vote on Prop 22? I don't remember how I voted on that." Now, Mr. Speaker, this utterly exceeds all bounds of plausibility, that the Secretary of Labor for our state would not remember how she voted on this major labor initiative less than 3 years ago. So I think it's fairly safe to conclude that this was a false statement that Ms. Su made to our committee. And just to be fair, I gave her several opportunities to correct her statement on that later in the hearing, and she still did not retract it. That is her testimony on the record that she does not remember how she voted on this major labor initiative while she was California's Secretary of Labor. Second was her testimony with respect to AB5. Now, AB5 is a law that has made it virtually impossible for countless professionals in California to continue their careers. It has essentially abolished independent contracting in hundreds of professions and has been widely condemned across the partisan spectrum. Now, Ms. Su has been called an architect of that law, AB5. As California Secretary of Labor, she was the one who enforced it, and she did so in the most aggressive, ruthless, broadest way possible to ensnare as many people as possible. After the law passed, she was on the record celebrating its passage. So you would think she'd have a pretty good answer when I asked her whether she thought AB5 was a good law. But after I asked that, here's what she said. She said, quote, "I don't know what, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Tell me what, give me a little bit more on what you mean by that." I took several other opportunities to ask her whether she thought AB5 was a good law. Each and every time, she refused to answer. I also asked Ms. Su whether she was involved in the drafting of AB5, and she responded simply no. However, she then contradicted herself later in the hearing when my colleague Mr. Burleson asked her about her involvement. She said that, oh yes, she did in fact provide technical assistance. When I asked Ms. Sue whether she was aware that people have lost their livelihoods in California because of this law, AB5, she said, "I have heard from people who have said that." She reiterated that exact language again. "I've heard people who said that. I've heard people who said something different too. I've had people tell me that," she said. Refusing each time to recognize the legitimacy of these claims, refusing to recognize that we've had countless people who have lost their livelihoods in California. And it was no less than 2 days after that hearing that we got yet another example of this. When the city of Los Angeles announced that it was having to terminate a contract with almost 100 truckers for a road repair program that had been around for around 130 years, and the Department of Public Works in the city of Los Angeles specifically cited AB5 as the reason it was canceling that contract. There are countless examples like this, and yet the most that Ms. Sue is willing to say is, "I have heard from people who have said that." Next, I asked Ms. Sue about her role with the massive $32 billion at a minimum unemployment fraud that occurred in California on her watch. I asked her several times, "Do you take any responsibility for that fraud?" She evaded the question several times before finally saying, "Yes, I do take responsibility to the fact the system did not deliver in ways that we would have hoped that it delivered." I then asked her several times what she would have done differently, what she's learned if she could do it all over again. And she could not name a single thing that she would have done differently to prevent this $32 billion unemployment fraud, even though the independent state auditor and leading Democrat lawmakers in California have blamed her specifically for the fraud. I also asked Ms. Sue about the migrant child labor crisis that has been uncovered by the New York Times. And I asked her whether she had communicated the scale of this problem to the White House prior to this year. Her response was, "I don't know. I don't know that." I, along with several other members of the committee, asked Ms. Sue if she would commit to not changing the joint employer rule or bringing a new joint employer rule that would threaten the entire franchise business model. She was evasive each and every time and would give no such commitment. She made comments such as, "We do not have a plan to do that. It is not on our agenda." She also said, "I commit to following all of the rules of rulemaking, everything that we're required to do. I pledge to you that we will go under my leadership, under my tenure at the Department of Labor. I can't sit here at this moment and tell you with certainty everything that's going to happen." Again, we tried several times, myself and several members of the committee. She would not commit to not bring a new joint employer rule. Finally, I asked Ms. Sue about the economic performance of her home state, California, where she was the Secretary of Labor for Governor Gavin Newsom and was the Labor Commissioner for several years before that. I asked Ms. Sue if she knew where California ranks among the states when it comes to its unemployment rank. She did not know. The answer is that California has the second highest unemployment rate in the nation. I asked Acting Secretary Sue if she happened to know which state has the highest poverty rate in the country. She didn't know. The answer, once again, is California. I asked Acting Secretary Sue if she knew which state has the lowest rate of earnings growth, of net earnings growth, of any of the 50 states. She didn't know that either. And once again, the answer is her home state of California, where she was the Secretary of Labor. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it is clear, based on Acting Secretary Sue's record, that she is not the right person for this role. She is not the right person for the highest labor position in the land, in our country, at this moment of such great importance for the American economy and American workforce. And I will once again encourage President Biden to withdraw her nomination and to nominate a secretary who will be on the side of American workers.